Hello and welcome to the Sisters for Fitness Wellness Show. I'm Stephanie Gaines-Bryant. Our guest today is Dr. Kimberly Brooks. She's a psychologist, and we're talking today about how to talk to your children about sexual abuse and sexual assault. Welcome this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Kimberly, we've got a very serious case going on here in Maryland. We've got 22-year-old Deontay Caraway, who is or was a teacher's aide, and he is accused of child porn. And so far we've got about 17 children who have been affected by this.
Right.
It's a good time to talk about how do we have that discussion with our children. What do they need to look out for so they don't find themselves in a situation that they can't handle? I want to begin by talking about different age groups, because how you talk to a 3-year-old, I'm sure, about sexual abuse is going to be very different from how you talk to a 12-year-old.
Correct.
How do you begin that discussion?
So there are a couple of different levels of discussion. As you said, it's definitely different for a 3-year-old than it is for a 13-year-old or a 16-year-old. So for a very young child, the most important thing is from the beginning teaching them the proper names for their body parts and not using euphemistic terms or sort of silly terms, but really using actual anatomically correct terms for your body parts so that kids are comfortable talking about their bodies and see that as a matter-of-fact kind of conversation. So that when someone talks to them in that way, they're more likely to come to you and say, you know, Mrs. So-and-so said that she wanted to touch my whatever. Then they're more likely to talk about it as something weird or odd because they're not used to talking about it that way.
How do you do that? I mean, where should you have that discussion? Should it be a family thing? Should it be a one-on-one thing? Where should that discussion take place?
So it's one of the reasons why people like myself, psychologists and other people who focus on family and family relationships, really emphasize the importance of family time, so that it's not this special discussion that we have. It's something that comes up as a matter of course in our regular family discussions, whether it's regular family dinner time, our Friday night game time, but we have regular family time together that any number of topics could come up, and this might be one of those things that comes up, again, in a casual way, so it's not a big discussion that we're having.
A lot of predators, they put fear in the hearts of their victims by saying, don't tell anyone. How do you make sure that that line of communication is always open? You might not want to discuss it with me, but have a cousin, a friend, someone. How do you make sure that the kids know that they have to have someone to talk to?
There are a couple of things that are recommended specifically. One, again, is having that regular family time. So there's not a special time I have to try to figure out when I can talk to mom or when I can talk to dad or when I can talk to big brother or big sister. We have time set aside on Fridays where we're all sitting around and talking. So this is a time where I can talk to them. The other thing is to talk to kids about the importance of not having, there's never a secret. There's never anything that's not okay for mom and dad to know. It's always okay to tell me, and my love for you is unconditional. It doesn't matter. So a predator can't say, well, mommy's not going to love you if you tell her that, you know, X happened. Because I know that's not true. My mom will love me no matter what. And that's something that you reinforce on a daily basis. Again, it's not part of this discussion that we have about sexual abuse or child predators. It's just a thing that we discuss all the time.
How do child predators choose their victims? In this particular case with Caraway, he used cell phones to lure the kids in. Do they have some sort of radar where they sort of know who's vulnerable, and how can you not be that vulnerable kid?
And that's an important point to raise, because it's not that having a cell phone makes your child vulnerable. It's not that having certain apps makes your child vulnerable. It's the vulnerable kids who get sucked into this kind of thing. And kids are vulnerable when they're isolated, when they have poor social skills, when they don't have strong attachments and relationships to family and peers. And it's one of the reasons why, as a psychologist who specializes in working with young children, we put a lot of emphasis, somewhat to this dismay of other people, on peer relationships and social skills, because the child who doesn't feel connected, who doesn't have good social skills, is vulnerable.
We have the case, of course, in Virginia as well, where the 13-year-old was lured out of her home, ended up being killed by, allegedly by some students, some older students. And the girl had spent a good portion of her life sick. You know, so you have these kids who are so darn vulnerable, and you also have something we didn't have, which is the whole internet age.
It's scary. It's scary. And she had also been bullied, so in that sense, again, her peer relationships were not strong. So when you see that and you have a child who's having difficulties in their peer relationships, that's something important to pay attention to. It's not something to sort of blow off and look at as a phase or something that, you know, is not that important. Those are very, very important issues for kids, their peer relationships, and having strong peer relationships is very, very important for their self-esteem.
I was looking at some statistics this morning, and it said something to the effect that 20% of adults had been abused as children, 20% of female adults, and males is something like 5 to 16%, something like that.
And we actually think it's higher for men, but it's not as often reported for men, because for boys and young boys and adolescent boys, it can be a more shameful kind of thing to admit vulnerability in that way.
So are we seeing more instances of this now, or it's just that it's being brought to light more?
It's hard to say. My own personal feeling is that it's always been around, and that now we have more outlets for obtaining that information. And there's the news media, there's social media. So I think it's always been around. Kids have always been preyed upon. I don't know that they're preyed upon any more so now than they have been in the past, but we certainly hear about it a lot more.
Do you find that if someone was victimized as a child, that in some instances, because you can't just turn around and say everyone who's been abused becomes an abuser,
right?
But do you find that they're more likely?
Statistically, yes, there's a strong connection between abusers and those who've been abused, yeah.
We're living, as we just mentioned, in an age of the internet. Before this case, I had no idea what Kik was.
Hard to keep up.
It's some sort of telephone app?
It's an app where kids can text, or people can text each other, but it's anonymous, and that's the thing that's problematic. So you don't know necessarily who you're talking to, and there's no way to track it. So with text messages, there's a history and there's a footprint that you can track. With Kik and some of the other Snapchat, some of the other online text messaging apps, there's no way to track who you're talking to or to know for sure who you're talking to.
It's hard for parents. How do you know, because you don't want to tell your child you can't use any apps, or you can't do. You want them to be able to use the technology, but you want them to be safe in it so much. And everything changes from, it seems like, day to day.
Quickly.
How do you keep your kids safe when it comes to that?
And it's actually not as difficult as it seems. There are a number of parental controls that are in place. For example, with my own son, he cannot download anything that I don't see on my phone. As soon as he downloads something, it shows up on my phone as well. So I know what kinds of apps he's downloading, what kinds of games he's downloading. In addition to that, you can have your, what's the word I'm looking for? Your ID, your password ID connected to their phone, so that they need that password ID to download anything. So if they don't have the password, they can't download the app. There are also all sorts of devices that you can get. There's one called Circle that's made by Disney that allows you to control the phone, the Xbox, the television, everything. You can program it for certain shows, certain apps. You can turn it off, you can turn it on. So you really are in control of what they're watching and seeing. So there are a lot of parental assistance out there. It's just that people have to make themselves aware of it.
How do you talk to your kids? We were talking earlier about how to talk to a 3-year-old opposed to how to talk to a 12-year-old. Let's get more specific with that. What do you tell, let's just say, a younger child whose language skills are not the same as an older child.
Right.
How do you approach that? Like you said, using the appropriate words when it comes to their body parts. What are some of the other approaches you can use?
So playtime with young children is a wonderful, wonderful opportunity to learn all kinds of things about what's going on in their world, because they will play it out for you. If somebody's bothering them, that more than likely will come up in their play. And by bothering them, I mean if they're having a conflict with one of their peers in preschool, it'll come up in their play. The two characters, you know, the Barbie and the Ken, will fuss and fight about, well, you didn't share your toy with me, well, you didn't. And you'll, that must be going on at preschool. For kids, let's say moving up to elementary age, you can have a more pointed conversation, but again, the more casual and matter of fact you can be about it, the more information, so to speak, you'll get from them. So you're out and you're at Disney World and you're having ice cream, and that's really yummy. Can I have a taste of that? By the way, did you see that story the other day on the news about the little boy? That was really, oh, this is good ice cream. Isn't this good? So you weave it in. You don't have, again, a big talk about something, but you weave it in for an elementary age kid. For adolescents who are not particularly talkative usually, driving casually to a game. What are you and your friends going to be doing? What are you going to do after school? Oh, who's going to be involved? Are you any new friends? They'll talk if you talk casually. Again, turn on the radio. Oh, that song. You can talk about the content of the song. You can talk about how that brings up certain memories for you about things you used to do. Definitely talking about yourself with teenagers helps a lot.
A lot of people don't want to be that open. They don't want to talk to their team. They want to have this appearance of being perfect,
right?
And you don't have to be.
No, you don't have to be, and they don't really expect you to be.
We just think they.
We just think they do, and it makes them feel more comfortable to know, okay, she made a mistake too. She made a bad choice too. So I'm not. It's not so bad that I made a mistake, and maybe I can talk about that.
How can the teachers get the education they need as far as this is concerned? How can the school systems, because everyone needs to work hand in hand.
Absolutely.
The parents, the teachers, the school system, we all need to work together to make sure this doesn't happen. For example, why was this person given so much time alone with these children in order to film 40 videos?
Oh, wow. Yeah, and I guess every school has to come up with their own sort of ways of monitoring that. I know at a lot of schools, there really are limits on the amount of alone time a volunteer or an aide can have with a child. There are limits on where you can go with that child. I do work in a lot of elementary schools. I'm not allowed to go, for example, if the child I'm working with has to go to the bathroom, I'm not allowed to go to the bathroom with them. So there are policies like that that can be in place in schools. It's unfortunate. It's true that we're not ever going to catch everybody. I mean, they did the background checks on this person, and there was nothing in his background check. You know, he didn't have a criminal record. He had some stuff that had gone on when he was a juvenile, but that is expunged, and so they didn't have access to that. But they did their due diligence, and nothing was there. So, unfortunately, it's really being vigilant about watching interactions when you're at school, and teachers being aware of kids who could be vulnerable, and just having their radar up.
And of course, with the school system, we can't sweep things under the rug.
Right.
We've got the lives of children in our hands. So if you see something, you've got to speak up. You've got to say something.
And they are mandated reporters, which means that if they suspect, and the problem with that is that most people think they have to know or they have to be able to prove what they suspect, and that's not the case. The law says if you have a suspicion of abuse, you're obligated by law to report it. There are parents, frankly, who have a hard time with that. A teacher reports something because they're by law supposed to report a suspicion of abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, and sometimes parents are upset if a report is made, but you have to be able to get past that and say, I'm
Interestingly enough, that was a question. Can you prove that these things are going on? And like you said, sometimes all you have is a feeling. And as a parent, that should be enough.
Absolutely.
If you have a feeling.
If your gut is telling you something, you should listen to it. And I think a lot of times, for teachers and parents, we kind of And the research actually bears this out, that as women, we have a tendency sometimes to not want to hurt someone's feeling or not want to make someone uncomfortable. So we might have a gut feeling about something, but I don't want him to get in trouble, or I don't want to hurt his feelings. What if it's not true? So that can be a difficult hump to get over for a lot of people.
We've been talking about prevention, but what do you do if your child has been approached or has been
abused?
Yes.
You really, 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 I can't stress this enough, need to get that child intervention and help. Need to get that child therapy, because these are lifelong consequences.
That's what I was going to ask you. Is this something that you can carry for the rest of your life?
Absolutely, absolutely, especially if it goes untreated. Now, it's a part of who you are, treated or not, but how it becomes a part of you and what you do with that and your ability to move past that is affected by the treatment. If you don't get treatment, more often than not, there are negative consequences that are with you for the rest of your life that have to do with trust and self-esteem and self-worth.
Does the age matter with that? Meaning, if a 2-year-old has a situation, is it easier for that child to get over it than it would be for a 13-year-old?
We would like to think so. And unfortunately, and as you know, one of my areas of specialization is working with children birth to 5. So it can be sometimes difficult for me to convince a parent who has a child who's 2 or 3 or even 4 that they need to get intervention and get therapy, because they're going to outgrow it. They're not even going to remember this and why it stirred it up. But yeah, it's just as important, because it still goes to, so we can go back to as far as infancy. One of the stages of infancy has to do with homeostasis. So that is the baby's sense that everything is even keel, everything is as it should be, and so I can feel calm, I can feel like everything is okay. That's from infancy, and that's a response or a phase of development that occurs in a healthy way when they're adequately fed, when they're adequately changed, when they're adequately soothed. So if we can have an impact on a child's sense of homeostasis, that everything is okay, I don't have to be anxious, I don't have to be worried, as an infant, we can have a negative effect on them also when those things aren't provided, when there is a sense that the world is a dangerous place.
And what is that effect? Is there some sort of acting out that happens?
Oh, it can range from acting out to just generally being the type of child and or adult as they get older who doesn't trust anyone. I don't trust anybody, I don't believe, and not just trust what you say, but I don't emotionally trust you. So then it affects my ability to form healthy relationships, which then affects my ability to have a healthy life, have children, if that's what you want, have relationships, both romantic as well as platonic friendships and relationships. Those are the building blocks for all of those things.
When you're dealing with, for example, a special needs child, you talked about some children who have difficulty with their social skills. That's one of the things that comes along with autism or ADD, where you have difficulty with your social skills. How do you deal with a child who's in that situation and they don't have the adequate social skills to handle it?
So treatment can help with that. There are lots of programs and interventions available to help kids build social skills, and many schools now have what they call social skills groups that are led by either the guidance counselor or people that they bring in from the outside to do social skills groups that help teach kids how to engage with other kids in a healthy way and in a productive way. So I don't just barge into the middle of a group who's playing a game and demand that I get to play, which some kids will do. And so you have the therapist there who help teach them how to do that, how to engage with other kids, how to form relationships. Individual therapy can also be really helpful with that. There are lots of social skills games out there that parents can get to play with their kids at school that have to do with cards that have scenarios on them and talking about how you would respond and how you shouldn't respond. So there are lots of different interventions for kids.
We've grown a lot over the years in our knowledge about sexual abuse, but of course we haven't grown enough.
Right.
So when we think about some cases, like we tell the kids, oh, if the guy in the white van but it's
the black coat.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Usually predators don't look like predators.
No, they're statistically, it's someone they know and someone who's close to them. And even more specifically, it's more often than not a family member.
Is there a particular profile?
There really isn't.
There can't be.
There really
I'm
isn't.
sure.
No, and it's unfortunate to say, but again, because it's more often someone that the child and or family knows and knows well, and even more often a family member, it's really incumbent on parents to be vigilant about what their children are doing, who they're doing it with, keeping an eye out for your child at all times is important.
And we've seen also that these situations can happen everywhere. With the situation we've been discussing, there are some alleged incidents that happened at church, a community center, just school, different places that you would consider safe zones. When I send my child to school, I'm thinking he or she is safe. So so I guess we have to emphasize to the kids there are no real safe zones?
Right. There are no absolute safe zones, right? So anything can happen anywhere, and of course you don't want to frighten your child.
Exactly, that was the next
question. They should be looking over their shoulder every 5 minutes for, But again, if you put those things in place, again, from the time that they're very little to the time they start school, then some of that is not necessary. You don't have to kind of scare them about, the boogeyman at school or, there not being any safe places, because they have enough sense of self-worth, self-esteem. They have the kind of relationship with their parent where they know that no matter what happens or what anyone says, my parents love me, and no matter what happens, I can always talk to them. Then they're already in a good place. So you don't have to worry about, but you still have to do your, again, due diligence about the school and the safety precautions that they take, and the school still has to do their part as well.
We talked about apps with children and the fact that there's so much stuff out there and that new stuff comes about
every day.
Every day. What about things like Facebook? Those sites.
Yeah, I am one of those parents who believes that your friend, you cannot have a Facebook page unless I am one of your friends. I need to be able to see your Facebook page. You can be 16, 17, 18. Okay, that doesn't matter. And that's my job. It's my job to keep you safe. So if you're uncomfortable with that, now there are kids who then will develop another page. That's enough. But again, you have to do as much as you can. You can't be there 24/7. You can't do everything all the time, but you can do as much as you can.
What about as far as, because as we know, a lot of bullying can go on. Online. What about as far as giving them exposure to, all of our kids love the video games.
Oh, yeah. And it's not something that's well known, but it is a fact that your kids can be accessed through those video games.
Yes,
the Xbox.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So you have to monitor that kind of stuff as well and be present as much as possible, especially for younger children when they're playing those video games on the Xbox or the other PS. I don't even remember all the names of PS2 or whatever they're called, PlayStation. You have to be there to monitor them. The days where we can sit our kids down in front of a TV and go about our day doing something, I think are really gone for younger children. For older kids, it's a little different. Again, hopefully you have set some groundwork in place that makes them less vulnerable. Because again, it's not the apps and it's not the devices that make them vulnerable. Vulnerable kids gravitate toward the things that cause them harm.
I didn't realize that you could have that type of interaction. My son is playing a video game, and I'm in the kitchen cooking, and I hear another voice. And who is that?
Right.
And at that moment, I realized that the kids could be very easily accessed.
Yeah.
Through that.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and so one of the things I actually recommend is that very young children not use those because they don't have the wherewithal to say, and if they have headphones on, then you don't hear them. So someone could be, talking to them and you don't even know it. So for very young children, 6 and younger, I don't think it's a good idea for them to be on those video games.
And then you have some kids, they may have the chronological age, but they're not emotionally mature enough to deal with that. As we wrap up the show, let's give some tips. If you were to give some tips to parents, what to look out for as far as who predators prey on, these different apps, what would your best advice be?
So one thing I would say is if you know that your child is having difficulties in school and has some difficulties socially and is prone to being socially isolated, that is a child you need to get some intervention for, so you can shore up his self-esteem and self-worth, build up those skills that makes him him or her less vulnerable. When it comes to different devices, I would say if you're not willing to do your homework and put on the parental control apps on your phone, check his or her phone occasionally. I check my son's text messages even occasionally to see what kinds of conversations he's having. If you're not willing to kind of do that, then it's probably not a good time for them to have, if you're too busy, and I understand that, not a good time for them to have that device, whether it's a cell phone or an iPad. The other thing I would say is if your child is one who spends a lot of time alone, then whatever device it is, whether it's an an iPhone or a cell phone, not to let them have that when they're alone, because you can't monitor that if you're not with them. Unless you have the parental controls, then you can. But those would be some of the things that I would recommend.
What age do you think? My husband and I grappled with this with each of the children, and they each sort of got the phone at a different age.
Based on their maturity, right?
Yes. But is there an average age that you think kids are responsible enough to?
It's hard to say. I've seen kids, I will say, I've seen kids in my office as young as 3, 4 who have their own iPad. I wouldn't recommend that. Again, unless you have some strong parental controls, but kids, because this is what they've grown up with, they know how to get around. Even kids 3 and 4 know more than we do about these things. So I would say 3 and 4 is a little too young to have your own iPad or iPhone. But in general, I would say, like we were saying before, it depends on their level and knowing your child. Are they mature enough? Are they emotionally in a place where this would be a good thing for them, where they can handle conflicts that may come up? Because kids, even if it's not quite bullying or anything really inappropriate, they can still be mean, and that can still have an impact on them. So if you're not willing and in a place where you can monitor that kind of thing, and or your child's not mature enough to handle it, then it's probably not a good idea.
And again, keep those lines of communications open with children, making sure that they'll never be afraid to tell you something. And if they can't tell you something,
they'll tell someone.
Tell someone to make sure that their voice gets heard. Because there are kids, a lot of times, they may feel voiceless.
And I'm glad you said that, because I know in a lot of homes, especially a lot of traditional homes, children really don't have much of a voice, and it's not okay for them to say no. Aunt Sue wants to give you a kiss, you're not allowed to say no. That's one of the things that I stress often in my practice. It's okay to respectfully say no to anyone.
Very good. Thank you so much for joining us again. You joined us a couple of months ago to talk about the holiday blues, and I'm sure you will be joining us again in the future. We've been talking to psychologist Dr. Kimberly Brooks about how to talk to your kids about sexual abuse and sexual assault. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Stephanie Gaines-Bryant. You've been watching the Sisters for Fitness Wellness Show. Have a great day.